Imagine this. You're standing on the edge of a high-stakes operation, the adrenaline is pumping, and everything you've trained for is about to be put to the test. Now, picture the one person you rely on to guide you through it all. Someone who has seen it all suddenly falls. What do you do then? This is exactly what happened on one fateful day to Agent James Turner, a man we all looked up to as a mentor, a friend, and a hero. But what happens when the hero becomes the victim? Stay with me, because this story is not just about crime. It's about the price of service and the true cost of being a part of something bigger than yourself. Before we dive deeper into this emotional roller coaster, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss any of the powerful true crime stories we're sharing. Every week, I'll bring you stories from behind the scenes, real experiences, and insights that you won't find anywhere else. Whether you're interested in law enforcement, human resilience, or just gripping tales of bravery and loss, this is your place. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation. It all began like any other operation. The FBI had been gathering intel on a dangerous criminal syndicate operating across several states. We had a solid plan, a good team, and a clear objective. But what we didn't know was that this would be the operation that changed everything for us and for Agent James Turner. He wasn't just any agent, he was the best of us, the one we turned to for guidance, strategy, and a calm demeanor when things got chaotic. You see, James wasn't just a seasoned agent. He was the kind of person who made everyone else feel like they could accomplish anything, no matter how impossible it seemed. Now, I want you to imagine the moment you hear that a hero, someone you trust with your life, is fighting for theirs. No one had prepared us for what was about to unfold. I've worked hundreds of cases, and I thought I had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for this. As we were deep into the operation, it happened, the sound of gunfire echoing through the streets, the kind of sound that freezes you in place, makes you question if it's real. That's when we heard James was hit. I still remember the look in my colleagues' eyes when they told us the news. The air went still. Every person in that room, every agent who had ever worked with him, felt the same sinking feeling in their chest. The man we relied on was now the one in danger. James wasn't just our leader, he was our family. We shared countless hours together, training, strategizing, and sometimes even sharing meals when the job didn't give us time for anything else. But no matter what, we knew that James would always have our back. So when we heard that he was down, it wasn't just a blow to our operation, it was a blow to our entire sense of safety. Every single one of us was now vulnerable, and it hit hard, especially when we realized how little we could do at that moment. That feeling of helplessness, it's something no agent, no matter how experienced, should ever have to face. Hang in there, because the hardest part is coming. What happened next will make you see how much we were all affected by losing one of our own. The story of James Turner isn't just about the danger we face as agents, it's about the deep, personal toll it takes on the people we work with and the families we leave behind. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why the cost of service isn't just paid in hours worked or cases closed. Sometimes it's paid with something much more valuable. So stay with me, because you're about to hear how this story ended and how it forever changed the way we see ourselves and the work we do. Like most operations, this one started early. The adrenaline was pumping. The team was in position, and we were ready to execute the plan we'd rehearsed for weeks. As agents, we're conditioned to keep our cool under pressure, to focus solely on the mission at hand. But there's always that moment, the quiet before the storm, where something doesn't feel right. You know it in your gut, even if every rational part of you says everything's fine. That was the feeling we had as we prepared to move in. We had no idea that this would be the moment that changed everything for us and for Agent James Turner. James was leading the charge. His experience and calm demeanor were exactly what we needed. It wasn't just his skill in the field that set him apart. It was his ability to read people and situations. He knew exactly when to push, when to pull back, and when to rely on his team. He had this way of making everyone feel safe, even when the circumstances were far from it. I'd been in the field with him countless times, and every time he was a steady hand guiding us through the chaos. But that day, something was different. As we advanced, the tension was palpable. Every corner we turned, every room we checked, felt like we were one step closer to something big, something dangerous. It wasn't just the criminal syndicate we were after, it was the uncertainty of knowing that anything could go wrong. In this line of work, you're always on edge, but we trusted our training, and we trusted each other. And James, more than anyone, gave us the strength to keep pushing forward. The mission was going smoothly until we hit a snag. As we reached a narrow hallway, we saw movement up ahead. It was fast, too fast. Then, suddenly, we heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot echoing off the walls. A burst of panic shot through the air, but James, he was calm, always calm, immediately signaled for everyone to take cover. He called out commands, his voice steady despite the chaos. It was like a reflex for him, the ability to remain focused in the midst of gunfire. We all dove behind cover, hearts racing as the sounds of gunshots intensified. In those moments, everything else fades away. You stop thinking about the danger to yourself, and your mind focuses solely on one thing: survival. James' voice rang out again, directing the team. I could hear his commands through the chaos, still so clear and firm. But that's when I heard something that I'll never forget: the unmistakable sound of a bullet hitting its mark. A brief gasp from one of the team members told me what I feared. James had been hit. My heart sank. I knew what that sound meant, but it didn't seem real. Not to him, not to us. I froze for a second. Every part of me screamed to run toward him, to help, but I knew that we couldn't risk exposing ourselves further. We had to stay in position. The mission wasn't over, but in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. James was out there, possibly injured, and all we could do was listen to the radio as we awaited updates. By then, the intensity of the situation had escalated beyond anything we had prepared for. Every move we made felt more calculated, more deliberate, knowing that we were no longer just trying to bring criminals to justice. Now, we had to save one of our own. A man who had dedicated his life to saving others. The team was focused on their tasks, but I could see the concern in their eyes. We had trained for situations like this, but there's no way to prepare for the reality of seeing a colleague in danger. And as much as I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind told me we were in far deeper than any of us had imagined. We continued with the operation, but every step, every moment from that point on, felt heavier. We weren't just pushing through an operation anymore, we were pushing through with the weight of knowing that James was out there, and his life was hanging in the balance. At that moment, everything changed. It was no longer just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about protecting the man who had always been the protector. I can still hear it, the sound of that single gunshot cutting through the chaos. It wasn't just noise, it was a sound that carried weight, the kind that freezes time. In an instant, everything went silent. The radio chatter, the footsteps, even our breathing seemed to stop. For a split second, it was like the world forgot to move. And then came the words that no one ever wants to hear. Agent Turner is down. At first, I didn't believe it. My mind rejected the idea completely. James Turner wasn't the kind of man who went down easily. He'd been through so many near-death moments that he almost seemed invincible. He was always the one protecting us, the one who stayed calm when everyone else was losing their heads. But when I looked toward the end of that hallway, I saw him lying there, motionless, and every ounce of denial drained out of me. I felt this rush of anger and fear all at once. Anger because someone had dared to hurt one of us, and fear because, for the first time in my career, I realized that we weren't untouchable. No amount of training, no level of experience could shield us from what had just happened. James was more than our leader. He was the anchor that held the team together, and now our anchor had fallen. The medics were called in immediately. I remember pushing through the chaos, shouting for people to move. Every second felt like an eternity. The sound of sirens and radio static blurred into one endless hum. I caught a glimpse of him as the paramedics worked, his vest torn, his shirt soaked in red. His hand twitched slightly, like he was fighting to hold on. That small movement was the only thing keeping me grounded. As the team secured the area, something inside me shifted. We had a job to do, neutralize the threat. But now there was something more primal driving us. It wasn't just about the mission anymore, it was personal. We needed to make sure that what happened to James wouldn't be for nothing. I could see the same fire in everyone's eyes. Agents who had worked alongside him for years were now fueled by something raw: grief, rage, determination. It all blended together into this unspoken vow. We would finish what he started. Back at headquarters, the atmosphere was heavy. Everyone was waiting for updates, hoping for a miracle. But deep down, we knew the odds. We'd seen too many cases like this. Still, when it's one of your own, logic doesn't matter. You cling to hope, even when it's slipping through your fingers. Hours passed, but no one left. The silence in that room was deafening. Every time the phone rang, everyone stopped breathing for a second. Every face turned toward the door, waiting for someone to walk in and tell us he'd made it. I remember staring at the wall where his name was printed on the operation board. Agent James Turner, Field Lead. It hit me that if the worst happened, that name would move from the active roster to the memorial list on the wall downstairs. The wall no one wants their name on. The wall reserved for heroes who never made it home. And when the call finally came, you could feel the life drain from the room. The medics had done everything they could, but Agent Turner didn't make it. For a few seconds, no one spoke. No one cried. It was just silence. The kind that breaks you from the inside out. That day we didn't just lose an agent, we lost a part of ourselves. Every mission after that felt different. The badge on our chests felt heavier, because now it wasn't just metal. It was a reminder of the price we pay, the blood that seals our oath. And for me, that sound, the shot that took down Agent James Turner, has never stopped echoing in my mind. When news of James Turner's death reached the rest of the Bureau, it spread like wildfire, fast, disorienting, and devastating. You could feel the shift in energy the moment you walked into headquarters that morning. Conversations that used to fill the corridors were replaced by silence. Even the sound of footsteps seemed muted, as if the building itself was mourning. No one said it out loud, but we all knew nothing would ever be the same again. I remember walking past James's desk. His coffee mug was still there, half full, as if he'd be back any moment to finish it. His files were open, his notes scattered, a frozen snapshot of a life interrupted. It's strange how, in this job, one moment you're chasing leads and the next, you're staring at the empty chair of someone who used to be invincible. The toughest agents in the room, people who had seen horrors most can't imagine, just sat there staring at the floor. There's a particular kind of silence that comes with grief, heavy, suffocating, and absolute. James wasn't just another agent. He was the moral compass of our team. He held us accountable, kept us grounded when the lines between right and wrong blurred. Losing him wasn't just losing a colleague, it was losing the heart of who we were as a unit. And that realization hit us harder than any bullet ever could. I could see it in their faces. The guilt, the disbelief, the pain that no amount of training could prepare you for. The Bureau sent counselors, of course. It's protocol when an agent dies in the line of duty. But what they don't understand is that talking doesn't erase the guilt. Because deep down, every one of us asked ourselves the same question: could I have done something differently? That question haunts you. It creeps in late at night, when the world is quiet, and it stays. The truth is, it's never just the one who dies who carries the scars, it's everyone who stood beside them. During the debrief, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every detail of the mission was dissected, analyzed, questioned. The officials wanted answers. What went wrong? Who made what call? Who could be held accountable? But as I sat there listening, it became clear that no report, no diagram could capture what really happened out there. What happened wasn't just tactical, it was human. It was a moment of fate, of chaos, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But try explaining that to people who only see numbers and procedures. Later that night, I drove past the memorial wall. It's a simple wall, rows of engraved names of those who gave their lives in service, and there, freshly added, was his James Turner. Seeing it etched in stone made it real in a way that words couldn't. I stood there for a long time, replaying every memory I had of him, the briefings, the late nights, the quiet moments where we talked about life outside the bureau. He always said this job wasn't about glory or recognition, it was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and he did that until his very last breath. The next day we had to go back to work. That's the cruel reality of this job. The world doesn't stop for grief. Cases keep coming, criminals don't rest, and justice still demands to be served. But walking back into that office, seeing his nameplate still on the desk, it felt wrong. There was a hole in our team that no one could fill. We tried to keep moving forward, but every mission after that carried his ghost with us. And as much as we tried to convince ourselves that we could separate the emotion from the work, we couldn't, not after James. Because every time we put on that badge, every time we entered the field, we were reminded of what it truly costs to wear it, not in glory, but in sacrifice. And for us, that sacrifice now had a name: Agent James Turner. Grief doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in quietly, in the moments when you least expect it. After James Turner's death, the Bureau went back to business as usual, or at least that's what we tried to tell ourselves. On paper, the operation files were closed, the mission debriefed, and the incident categorized as a line of duty fatality. But the truth is, nothing about what followed was usual. The loss of James had left a crack in the foundation of our team, and day by day that crack was spreading. At first, everyone dealt with it in their own way. Some threw themselves into work, staying long hours at their desks, refusing to go home. Others avoided the office altogether, taking sick days or reassignments. I remember one of the younger agents, Carter, who had trained under James. He stopped talking altogether for a while. He used to be the first to crack a joke in the room, always the light in a tense operation. Now his desk sat in silence. You could see it in his eyes. He blamed himself. We all did, in one way or another. I wasn't any better. Sleep became a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hallway, the gunfire, the moment James fell. I'd replay it over and over, trying to see if there was something I could have done differently. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know that guilt is a natural part of the job, but this was different. This wasn't the guilt of a bad call or a missed clue. This was the guilt of surviving when someone better than you didn't. Even our briefings changed. There used to be laughter, casual conversation, small talk about families or weekend plans. Now it was just business. Cold, mechanical. No one wanted to acknowledge the empty seat at the table. The Bureau replaced James's position quickly because they had to. That's how the system works. But no one ever really replaced him. The new agent, Miller, was competent, disciplined, and smart, but he wasn't James. And everyone knew it. He tried to lead, but the room didn't respond the same way. Respect can be earned, but the kind of trust James had, that was built through years of service and sacrifice, you can't replicate that. I remember one day, about 3 weeks after the funeral, walking into the locker room. Someone had taped a photo of James to the inside of his locker door. It was an old picture, him smiling, arms slung over my shoulder after a successful bust. Someone had written on the photo, in marker, "Forever one of us." It was simple, but it hit harder than anything else. I stood there staring at it, realizing how much he had been the glue that held us all together. As weeks turned into months, the team fractured. Assignments that used to run smoothly started falling apart. Tempers flared. Patience ran thin. And for the first time in my career, I saw something I'd never seen in an FBI unit. Fear. Not fear of the criminals we hunted, but fear of losing another one of us. Every door we kicked down, every informant we met, every operation we planned carried that shadow. Eventually the Bureau offered me counseling again. They said it might help. I went once. The therapist asked me to describe the moment I found out James was gone. I told her I didn't remember much, but that was a lie. I remembered everything. I remembered the sound of my partner's voice cracking over the radio. I remembered the blood. I remembered the silence after the chaos. But I couldn't say any of it, because putting it into words would have made it too real. I think that's the hardest part of losing someone in this line of work. You don't get to grieve like normal people. You bury it deep because there's always another case, another mission, another fight waiting for you. But the pain doesn't go away. It just hides beneath the badge, waiting for the next quiet moment to resurface. And when it does, it reminds you heroes fall too, and sometimes the ones left standing are the ones who never truly recover. After James Turner's death, the hardest part wasn't returning to the field, it was facing myself out there. Among the chaos, you can hide behind protocol, procedure, and adrenaline. But when the noise fades and you're left alone with your thoughts, that's when the real battle begins. And it's not one you can win with a gun or a badge. Every morning, I'd drive past the same coffee shop James used to stop at before heading into the office. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, said it kept his head clear. For weeks, I found myself parking outside, staring at the door, half expecting him to walk out and nod like he always did, like nothing had changed. It's strange how the mind clings to routine when everything else falls apart. I started noticing the small ways grief changes you. The things that used to bring purpose start to feel meaningless. The job, once a calling, began to feel like punishment. Every new case felt heavier, every risk sharper. The Bureau gives you tools to protect others, but it never gives you the tools to protect yourself from the aftermath. You see things that carve themselves into your memory. You lose people you care about, and then you're expected to just move on. But grief doesn't follow orders. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. I'd pour myself a drink, sit by the window, and replay the mission in my head. The sound of gunfire, the flash of light, the silence after, it never stopped. It was like a loop I couldn't escape. The psychologists call it survivor's guilt. I call it penance, because deep down you start to believe that maybe if you had done something differently, they'd still be here. Rationally, you know that's not true. But grief isn't rational. It's relentless. James used to tell me that fear was the compass that kept us alive. If you stop feeling afraid, he'd say, you've stopped respecting the danger. Those words used to make sense to me. Now they haunted me, because after losing him, I didn't fear death anymore. I feared forgetting him. I feared that one day his voice would fade, his laugh would blur, and his memory would become just another story told in a briefing room. And I couldn't let that happen. There's a saying among agents, you leave a part of yourself behind at every scene. I never really understood it until James. Every case we worked after that felt like walking through shadows. His absence was a weight none of us could shake. We'd be in the middle of a briefing, and someone would make a suggestion he would have made, use a phrase he used to say. It was like he was still guiding us, even from beyond the grave. And that both comforted and destroyed me. The Bureau eventually held a commendation ceremony in his honor. They called it a celebration of service. I stood there listening to speeches about bravery and sacrifice, and all I could think was how wrong it felt. Because behind every medal, behind every word of praise, was the brutal truth that none of us wanted to admit: heroism comes with a price that no one should have to pay. And James paid it in full. After the ceremony, I walked outside alone. The sky was heavy gray, the kind of sky that presses down on you. I took a deep breath and realized that grief wasn't something to move past, it was something to live with. It becomes part of you, shaping the way you see the world, the way you carry yourself. And maybe that's how we honor them. Not by forgetting, but by carrying their story forward, by making sure their sacrifice meant something. And as I stood there, I whispered to myself, "We'll finish what you started, James." Because that's what he would have done. He never left a mission unfinished, and neither would I. In the months after James Turner's death, something inside me shifted. At first I thought it was just grief, something that would fade with time, but it didn't. Instead, it turned into something darker. I stopped sleeping. I stopped talking to people. Every lead we got, every case that crossed my desk, became personal. It was as if every criminal I hunted was a way to make up for what happened to him. Somewhere along the way, I stopped chasing justice and started chasing ghosts. I remember the first time my supervisor called me out on it. He said I was too close to the edge, that I was letting emotion cloud my judgment. Maybe he was right. But how do you explain to someone that emotion was the only thing keeping you going? When you've lost someone like James, someone who represented everything good about what we do, you don't get to turn the page. You live in the margins of that loss, trying to fill the empty space he left behind. The team had changed too. We were still efficient, still professional, but the spark was gone. We stopped laughing. We stopped trusting ourselves. Every decision was second-guessed. Every risk weighed against the haunting reminder of what could go wrong. There's a kind of fear that comes after losing a man like James, not the fear of dying, but the fear of failing to honor his memory. And that fear starts to eat away at you. I started visiting his grave every Sunday. I told myself it was to pay my respects, but really I was looking for answers. I'd stand there reading his name over and over, trying to make sense of it all. Sometimes I'd talk to him, quietly, when no one was around. I'd tell him about the cases we were working, about the rookies he would have liked, about the mistakes I couldn't forgive myself for. It sounds crazy, I know. But in those moments, it felt like he was still there, listening, like he was still guiding me. One night after a particularly brutal case, I went back to my office and pulled out one of his old reports. His handwriting was neat, precise, methodical, just like him. At the end of the file, he had written a note for future agents. Every case is a story about people, not just crime. Don't lose sight of that. That hit me harder than any reprimand or lecture could, because I realized I had lost sight of it. Somewhere along the way, I had become consumed by the mission and forgotten why we were doing this in the first place. The breaking point came a few weeks later. We were deep in another operation, and I caught myself making reckless decisions, pushing my team too far, taking risks James would have never allowed. When one of my agents nearly got hurt, I saw the same look in his eyes that we all had the day James died. That's when it hit me. I had become the very thing I feared. I wasn't honoring James's memory, I was betraying it. My grief had turned into obsession, and that obsession was putting others in danger. I went home that night and stared at my badge for hours. That small piece of metal had defined my life for decades. But at that moment, it felt heavier than ever, because behind its shine was the truth that no one ever tells you about this job. Every act of courage, every sacrifice, leaves a scar. And if you're not careful, those scars start to define you. That night I made myself a promise. I would keep fighting, but not out of guilt or revenge. I would fight to be the kind of agent James believed in, the kind of man who remembered that this job isn't about glory or vengeance, but about people, about protecting the innocent even when the cost is unbearable. Because that's what James Turner stood for, and I owed him that much. There comes a point in every agent's life when the job stops being about catching the bad guys and starts being about making peace with yourself. After James Turner's death and the chaos that followed, I realized that I had been living in a shadow, chasing closure that didn't exist. The truth is, closure is a myth we tell ourselves to survive. What really exists is acceptance. And that took me a long time to understand. I remember one morning, months after everything had settled, when I was assigned to a training session for new recruits. At first, I didn't want to go. I felt like a ghost walking among the living. What could I possibly teach these kids when I hadn't even figured out how to live with my own mistakes? But then I thought about James, about how he always took the rookies under his wing, teaching them not just tactics, but values, patience, empathy, restraint. So I went. When I stood in front of those recruits, looking into their eager, unscarred faces, something shifted in me. I saw who we used to be before the loss, before the weight of the world hardened us. I started talking about the realities of this job, not the textbook version but the one that scars you. I told them about fear, about loss, and about how sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. I told them about James Turner, not as a headline or a statistic, but as a man who believed in doing what was right, even when it cost him everything. As I spoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Maybe that's what redemption looks like in this line of work. Not erasing the pain, but using it to build something stronger. Every lesson I shared, every warning I gave, was a way of keeping James alive. His story became a tool, a shield, a reminder that bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about standing up even when you're broken. Later that day, one of the recruits approached me. He said, "Sir, I joined the Bureau because I wanted to be like men like Agent Turner." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and for the first time in months, I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of gratitude. Because, in that moment, I realized James hadn't really died. He lived on through every person who heard his story and decided to serve with integrity, with heart. That night, I visited his grave again. The air was cold, the kind that bites your lungs. I knelt down, placed my badge beside his name, and said, "We're still here, brother. Still fighting the good fight." For the first time, it didn't hurt to say it. The grief was still there, it always will be, but it no longer consumed me. It had transformed into something else, a promise. James Turner's story wasn't just about tragedy, it was about legacy, about the lives he touched, the principles he stood for, and the strength he left behind in all of us. The Bureau teaches you that agents are replaceable, that the mission always comes first, but that's not entirely true. Some people, like James, become part of the foundation. Their sacrifice shapes the way others carry the badge, the way they see the world, the way they live and protect. I realized then that my duty wasn't just to uphold the law, it was to uphold the memory of those who gave their lives for it, to make sure that their courage never faded into silence. And maybe that's what redemption truly is, learning to live not despite the pain, but because of it, turning the weight of loss into the strength to keep going. That's what James would have wanted. That's what he died believing in. And that's what I'll keep doing for him. Years have passed since that day, but time doesn't erase everything. The sound of the radio call, the flash of sirens, the last words James Turner spoke, they're carved into my memory. I used to think that pain fades with time. It doesn't, it just changes shape. What was once unbearable becomes a quiet ache, something you carry without realizing it. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my office, and the hum of the city fades into silence, I can almost hear his voice again. Steady, calm, unwavering. "We finish what we start," he used to say. And that's exactly what I've tried to do. James's story became something more than a tragedy. Within the Bureau, it turned into a lesson, a story told to new agents about courage, discipline, and the human cost of the badge. They talk about him like a legend now. But to those of us who knew him, he was just James, a man who laughed too loudly, who carried extra coffee for whoever forgot theirs, who believed that even the worst criminals deserved a fair chance. He wasn't perfect, but he was good. And that's rarer than most people realize. After his death, I was assigned to lead the division he once helped build. It was bittersweet, an honor that felt like both a burden and a responsibility. Every file I signed, every operation I greenlit, I thought of what he would have done. I tried to keep his values alive, to make sure that our mission didn't lose its soul in the process. The Bureau changes fast. Politics, technology, public pressure, it all evolves. But people like James Turner keep it grounded. They remind us that the badge means nothing without integrity. I often think about how he'd view the world today. The endless stream of information, the blurred lines between truth and manipulation. He always said the hardest battles weren't fought with guns, they were fought with conscience. I believe that now more than ever, every decision we make as agents shapes the world in ways we don't always see. And that's why remembering him matters. Not as a martyr, not as a headline, but as a compass. One day, I was cleaning out an old locker when I found something that stopped me cold, a small notebook wrapped in a plastic bag, with James's name on it. Inside were notes from one of our earliest cases together. On the last page, he had written a line that I'd never noticed before. "We don't serve justice for ourselves, we serve it for those who can't fight back." I must have read that sentence 100 times. It was simple, but it carried everything he stood for. That night, I placed that notebook in the Bureau's Hall of Honor, where the names of fallen agents are engraved into the wall. I traced my fingers across his name, and for the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt pride, because James Turner didn't die in vain. His life, and his death, became a reminder of what this job really means. Every time an agent steps into danger, every time one of us refuses to look away from injustice, we carry a piece of him with us. There's no glory in this work, that there never was, but there's purpose. And people like James are the proof of that. His story isn't about loss, it's about endurance. About how one man's courage can ripple through time, shaping the hearts and minds of those who follow. I don't visit his grave as often now, not because I've forgotten, but because I don't need to. He's still with me, in every decision, every act of courage, every moment I choose integrity over convenience. So if you ask me what his legacy is, I'd say it's simple. James Turner taught us that justice without humanity isn't justice at all. And as long as I wear this badge, I'll make sure the world remembers that.